Donald Trump standing on the steps of the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. Xi Jinping walking down to greet him at the bottom of the stairs. 300 Chinese children in blue and white uniforms waving American and Chinese flags. An honor guard in formation. Elon Musk standing on the steps behind the president. Tim Cook, Jensen Huang, Larry Fink, Jane Fraser, Steven Schwartzman, Kelly Ortberg, Boeing's CEO standing in Beijing, while Boeing is simultaneously manufacturing the bunker-busting bombs that just depleted to between 6 and 15 rounds, striking Iran's nuclear facilities. This image was taken today, May 14, 2026, the first American president to visit China in 9 years. And he brought with him more concentrated American economic and technological firepower than any diplomatic delegation in modern history. But here's the detail that nobody is leading with. Jensen Huang was not originally on the manifest. NVIDIA's CEO joined the plane at a stopover in Alaska, a last-minute addition. The man whose chips are the central battlefield of the US-China technology war, whose H-200 semiconductors China desperately needs and cannot legally purchase, boarded Air Force One in Anchorage because something changed in the hours before the plane reached Beijing that made his presence suddenly necessary. What changed? We are about to find out. This is Professor John. What is happening in Beijing right now is not a summit. It is a reckoning. And I want to take you through every verified detail of it. What the CEO delegation actually represents, and why the specific combination of Musk, Cook, Huang, Fink, Fraser, Schwartzman, and Ortberg, sitting across from Chinese Premier Li Qiang, is the most concentrated demonstration of American economic leverage ever assembled in a single room. What Xi's opening question about the Thucydides trap tells you about the existential anxiety driving Beijing into this meeting. What the joint statement on the Strait of Hormuz means for Iran's last remaining diplomatic lifeline. Why Xi's warning about Taiwan clashes and conflicts is the sharpest language he has ever used directly to an American president. And what the constructive strategic stable relationship framework that both sides just agreed to as a 3-year orientation actually means in operational terms for trade, technology, and the Taiwan question. Subscribe now because this summit is happening as you watch this video, and its outcomes are going to move markets, reshape supply chains, and determine the strategic environment that every government on Earth has to navigate for the next decade. Start with the image because the image contains the entire story before a single word is spoken. Xi Jinping walked down the stairs of the Great Hall of the People to meet Trump at the bottom. That is protocol. That is the host greeting the guest at the point of arrival. The specific detail is what happened next. Trump looked at the delegation assembled behind him on the stairs and told Xi that the group was there to pay respects to you and to China. And then Trump called Xi a great leader. That sentence, told to Xi in his own capital in front of his own honor guard with 300 Chinese children waving flags, is the specific diplomatic register that Beijing's protocol apparatus responds to most positively. It is face-giving language in the Confucian diplomatic tradition that governs Chinese state ceremony. Trump, who spent 2025 in a devastating trade war with China that pushed tariffs to over 100% on both sides, who called China a threat and a rival and a currency manipulator, is standing in Beijing calling Xi a great leader and saying his delegation came to pay respects. The question is whether that language reflects a genuine shift in the bilateral relationship, or whether it is the specific diplomatic lubricant that allows a conversation to happen whose real content is delivered through the specifics of what gets agreed and what gets refused. The CEO delegation tells you which interpretation is closer to the truth. Elon Musk runs Tesla, whose Shanghai factory reported total sales of 292,876 vehicles in the first 4 months of 2026, up 26.7% compared with the same period the year before. Tesla's China operation is one of the most profitable manufacturing investments any American company has made in the last decade. Musk needs China to keep buying Teslas. China needs Musk's battery technology, his supply chain relationships, and his public credibility as an indicator that foreign investment in China is safe. Musk told reporters after the welcome ceremony that he wants to accomplish many good things in China. He did not specify what those things are. Tim Cook runs Apple, which sells more than 60 million iPhones annually in the United States and manufactures approximately 80% of them in China. Cook has spent years managing the specific tension between Apple's China manufacturing dependency and the U.S. government's China technology policy. He shifted iPhone production for U.S.-bound devices to India under pressure from Trump's tariff regime. He committed $100 billion in U.S. investments. He is in Beijing because Apple's relationship with China is too large and too structurally embedded in its supply chain to be managed through anyone other than the CEO in direct conversation with Chinese leaders. Jensen Huang runs NVIDIA. NVIDIA's H200 chips are the most capable AI accelerator semiconductors commercially available. China's AI development program cannot achieve its stated ambitions without access to chips of this capability. The U.S. export control regime, which has been progressively tightening its restrictions on advanced semiconductor exports to China, has blocked NVIDIA from selling its most capable chips to Chinese buyers. Huang is in Beijing specifically to explore whether the summit creates a diplomatic opening that loosens those restrictions. A meeting with Chinese officials that Huang described as going excellently suggests conversations happened about the chip access question. What exactly was discussed and what commitments were made or implied is the specific detail that will define NVIDIA's China revenue trajectory for the next several years. Larry Fink runs BlackRock, the world's largest asset management firm with approximately $10 trillion under management. Fink's presence is about capital flows. BlackRock's ability to invest in Chinese markets, to offer Chinese investment products to Western institutional investors, and to participate in the infrastructure financing that Belt and Road projects require is directly affected by the state of U.S.-China relations. Fink coming to Beijing with Trump is a signal to Chinese counterparts that American institutional capital is prepared to re-engage with Chinese markets if the policy environment permits it. Jane Fraser runs Citigroup. Steven Schwartzman runs Blackstone. Kelly Ortberg runs Boeing. Each of them represents a specific sector of the American economy, whose China relationship is both economically critical and politically sensitive simultaneously. Chinese Premier Li Qiang sat across from this group and told them that American companies will have broader prospects in China, and that he hoped they would serve as bridges for communication and dialogue between the two countries. He urged them to help various sectors in the U.S. view China's development in a more objective and rational manner. That last sentence is the specific ask. Li is asking the most powerful American CEOs to go home and tell their government, their shareholders, and their public that China is not the threat it has been portrayed as. He is asking them to use their economic relationships as diplomatic instruments in reverse, to apply their influence in Washington on China's behalf. The CEOs are simultaneously being wooed with market access promises and being recruited as informal lobbying assets for Chinese interests in American domestic policy debates. This is the specific dual-use nature of the CEO summit within the summit. Economic engagement and diplomatic influence operation at the same time. Each CEO knows this and is calculating their own position accordingly. Now let me give you Xi's Thucydides trap question, because it is the most intellectually substantive and the most strategically revealing thing Xi has said publicly in any bilateral context in years. Xi asked whether the US and China could avoid the Thucydides trap. The Thucydides trap is the concept popularized by Harvard's Graham Allison, derived from Thucydides' analysis of the Peloponnesian War, describing the historically documented tendency for conflict to occur when a rising power challenges an established power for regional or global primacy. Allison studied 16 cases in the last 500 years where one power rose to challenge another. 12 of them resulted in war. Xi is raising this question in his opening remarks with the President of the United States present in his own capital in front of the world's cameras. He is publicly asking whether the structural logic of great power competition that has produced war 12 times out of 16 historical cases can be avoided in the specific case of China and the United States. Why does a confident leader leading a rising power open a high-stakes bilateral summit by raising the question of whether war between the two powers can be avoided? The answer is that the question is a signal about what Xi is most worried about. Leaders who are confident in their trajectory do not open summits with questions about whether the historical logic of great power rivalry can be transcended. They open summits with demands and offers and negotiating positions. Xi is opening with a philosophical question about whether catastrophic conflict is avoidable because he is genuinely uncertain about the answer. And he wants Trump to hear the question as an implicit plea for the kind of strategic stability that the constructive strategic stable relationship framework both sides agreed to today as the 3-year orientation is designed to provide. The 3-year framework is the most consequential structural output of today's summit. Both sides agreed to develop a constructive China-US relationship of strategic stability as the new orientation for bilateral ties. Beijing will treat this as the guiding framework for the next 3 years and beyond. Strategic stability means both sides agree not to do the things that would force a military confrontation. It means lines of communication stay open. It means commercial disputes get managed through bilateral mechanisms rather than escalating into sanctions and counter-sanctions. It means the temperature is controlled even when the underlying competition continues. For Iran, the strategic stability framework has a specific implication that deserves direct analysis. China is now committed to a 3-year constructive relationship with Washington. That commitment is incompatible with actions that directly undermine Washington's strategic priorities. The most visible current Washington strategic priority is the Iran blockade and the demand for Iranian nuclear compliance. If China is in a strategic stability framework with the U.S., its ability to provide Iran with the active economic and diplomatic support that would allow Tehran to outlast American pressure is reduced. Not eliminated, but reduced and constrained by the framework commitment. The joint statement on Hormuz is the Iran-specific output that tells you how Beijing's strategic stability commitment translates into operational terms for the Hormuz crisis. Both countries agreed that the Strait of Hormuz must remain open to support the free flow of energy. Xi expressed opposition to the militarization of the strait and any effort to charge a toll for its use. Both countries agreed that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, and Xi expressed interest in purchasing more American oil to reduce China's dependence on the strait in the future. Let me give you the specific meaning of each of these statements individually. Opposition to toll charges. Iran's Persian Gulf Strait Authority, the formal institution established last week to collect $2 million per vessel transit fees, has just been publicly opposed by China. The country that buys 98% of Iran's oil exports and that Iran has been treating as the anchor of its resistance to American pressure has publicly stated that it opposes the specific mechanism Iran is using to monetize Hormuz's control. The IRGC's Supreme Leader Advisor said last week that the strait is as precious as an atomic bomb and Iran will not forfeit the gains of this war. China said today that it opposes using the strait as a toll collection instrument. The two positions are directly contradictory. Both countries agreed Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. China sat across from the United States in Beijing and made this joint commitment. The IRGC has been betting on Chinese diplomatic cover at the UN Security Council as the backstop preventing maximum international pressure from producing maximum Iranian compliance. Every Security Council action that references the nuclear program now occurs in the context of China having publicly agreed that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. Vetoing those actions becomes more diplomatically costly for Beijing after today. Chinese interest in purchasing more American oil. This is the specific economic mechanism through which China can reduce its Hormuz dependency, while simultaneously developing the commercial relationship with the U.S. that the strategic stability framework requires. If China is buying more American oil, it needs the Hormuz choke point less. If it needs the Hormuz choke point less, its incentive to protect Iran's Hormuz leverage diminishes. This is the specific commercial substitution that the summit's Iran discussion is designed to accelerate. Taiwan. Xi said Taiwan is the most important issue in U.S.-China relations, and that if handled badly, the two countries risk collision and conflict. Those words, collision and conflict, delivered directly to the American president in Beijing, are the sharpest Taiwan warning Xi has delivered in any bilateral context in recent memory. But here is what the Thucydides trap question tells you about how to interpret the collision and conflict warning. Xi is not threatening war. He is warning that the structural dynamics of great power competition, if not managed carefully, produce war as an emergent outcome, even when neither party wants it. The collision and conflict language is the Thucydides warning made specific and bilateral. Xi is saying that Taiwan is the specific issue where the structural logic of U.S.-China competition is most likely to produce the outcome that the Thucydides trap analysis predicts. He is warning Trump that mismanagement of this specific issue is how the two powers end up in a conflict that neither may have intended. The specific context for the warning is the $25 billion U.S. arms sale to Taiwan that has been reported as on the summit agenda. Taiwan is watching this summit, as CSIS analysts noted, with attention focused precisely on the wording that emerges. Whether Trump reaffirms support for Taiwan's defense, whether he sounds ambiguous on arms sales, whether he gives Xi any rhetorical opening to claim that Washington is restraining Taipei, any of those outcomes would be Beijing's specific win from the Taiwan discussion. Trump's response to Xi's Taiwan warning has not yet been fully documented in what is available as this script is written. What is documented is that Defense Secretary Hegseth and Chinese Defense Minister Dong Jun were seen speaking via translator at the state banquet. The Defense Secretary of the United States and the Defense Minister of China sitting at the same banquet table having a direct conversation. That specific interaction, the two people who manage their respective countries' military machines in direct conversation at a state dinner in Beijing, is the operational expression of the strategic stability framework that the two leaders agreed to. The banquet itself deserves the analytical attention it rarely receives in Western coverage. The tables decorated with elaborate floral arrangements, an ornate model of the Temple of Heaven at the centerpiece table, servers in traditional red attire, 300 children who waved flags in the morning, now replaced by the visual language of Chinese civilization, performing its most formal hospitality ritual for the leader of its primary strategic rival. Xiaomi's CEO taking a selfie with Elon Musk, the two countries' defense ministers talking through a translator at a dinner table. Xi calling U.S.-China relations the most important bilateral relationship in the world. Trump calling it one of the most consequential in world history. This is managed competition being performed at the highest register of state ceremony. Not friendship, not alliance. Managed competition between two powers that each need the other to not escalate beyond a specific threshold and that are using every available instrument of diplomatic theater to communicate that they understand where that threshold is. But here is the real question that the summit's diplomatic warmth does not resolve. What actually changes for Iran? The joint statement creates diplomatic pressure. It does not create operational pressure. The IRGC's decision-making about the response, about the still reviewing status that has persisted for days past its deadline, about the Supreme Leader's advisor declaring the strait as precious as an atomic bomb, is not directly affected by a joint statement that Xi and Trump signed in Beijing. The IRGC does not take orders from Beijing. The Supreme Leader's security cordon does not check joint statements before issuing its own declarations. What the Beijing outcomes change is the diplomatic architecture within which Iran's decisions are made. China is now publicly committed to a position on Hormuz and on Iran's nuclear program that is incompatible with active Chinese support for Iranian resistance to those same positions. The shadow banking architecture that has been keeping Iranian oil revenue flowing through Hong Kong clearinghouses is harder to sustain when Beijing is publicly committed to a strategic stability framework with Washington that includes agreement on Iranian nuclear issues. The secondary sanctions enforcement that Rubio promised, the designation of Chinese entities that continue to facilitate Iranian oil purchases in violation of U.S. sanctions, becomes less diplomatically costly to implement after a summit that produced the strategic stability framework. Treasury can point to the joint statement as evidence that enforcement of sanctions against Chinese violators is consistent with the bilateral relationship's agreed framework rather than hostile to it. The specific Iranian response that Rubio expected on Friday, and that has not arrived as of the summit's first day, is being made in the context of China's summit commitments. The still reviewing status is being maintained while Beijing is publicly aligned with Washington on the core issues of Hormuz and nuclear nonproliferation. The longer the reviewing continues, the more isolated Iran's position becomes in the diplomatic landscape that the summit has just restructured. Xi invited Trump to the White House for a reciprocal visit on September 24th. Trump accepted. That visit is now on the diplomatic calendar. Both leaders have now made the bilateral relationship visible and personal in ways that create mutual accountability for what happens in the interval between May 14th in Beijing and September 24th in Washington. The Iran war, the Taiwan arms sale, the semiconductor export controls, the rare earth restrictions. All of these will be managed in the shadow of two scheduled presidential meetings that give both sides a deadline by which visible progress in the bilateral relationship needs to be demonstrable. Managed competition. Constructive strategic stability. 3 years. September 24th in Washington as the next checkpoint. That is what Trump and Xi agreed in Beijing today. And what they agreed has specific implications for every actor whose strategic calculation depends on Beijing or Washington being unable to coordinate. Iran is one of those actors. Its response is due. Its Supreme Leader's advisor is calling the strait an atomic bomb. Its president has met the wounded Supreme Leader for the first time. Its foreign ministry is still reviewing. And its most important economic partner just stood next to the President of the United States in Beijing and agreed that the strait must be open and Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. The 300 Chinese children in blue and white uniforms waved their flags. The honor guard performed. Xi walked down the stairs. Trump paid respects. Jensen Huang boarded Air Force One in Anchorage. The state banquet tables were decorated with models of the Temple of Heaven. And in Tehran, somewhere, someone is reading the joint statement and calculating what it means that China just said that publicly. This is Professor John.